The day Marcus Chen told me to stop loving his daughter was the same day I realized I had never truly understood what love meant until I looked at Serena Voss standing in his glass-walled office, 40 floors above the city, with her eyes filled not with fear, but with quiet, unbreakable defiance. I had worked at Voss Capital for 3 years. 3 years of early mornings and late nights, of learning every corridor of that steel-and glass tower like it was my second home. I had climbed from a junior analyst to one of the youngest senior directors the company had ever seen. People noticed my work ethic, my precision, my silence. What nobody noticed, or perhaps everyone noticed but pretended not to, was the way I looked at Serena Voss every single time she walked into a room. She was the CEO's daughter. Yes, but to me, she was the only person in that entire building who ever asked how I was doing and actually waited for the answer. Serena didn't belong to the cold world of mergers and acquisition spreadsheets. She had a warmth about her that felt almost dangerous in a place built on calculated risk. She volunteered on weekends, remembered the names of every intern, and had this habit of leaving coffee on people's desks without saying a word, just quietly making sure the people around her didn't run empty. I fell in love with her slowly, the way a person falls asleep gradually, and then, all at once, we had never spoken about it. Not once. I had buried it deep beneath professionalism and fear, because Marcus...
You're watching Wake Up Files, where every story carries a message of hope, kindness, and unexpected miracles. If you believe one story can inspire millions, press like, share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Wake Up Files so you never miss a story like this.
Voss was not a man who tolerated weakness, and loving his daughter without his blessing felt like standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark. But feelings have a way of surfacing no matter how hard you try to hold them underwater. A lingering glance in a conference room, a conversation that lasted 20 minutes longer than it needed to. A moment in the elevator where the doors closed and neither of us said anything, and somehow the silence said everything. Someone must have seen it. Someone always sees. Marcus called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon. The kind of Thursday where the sky over the city was gray and low, pressing down on the skyline like a warning. He was standing when I entered, his back to the door, hands clasped behind him as he looked out over the city he had built his empire above. He didn't turn around right away. He let the silence do the work first, the way powerful men always do, letting you feel small before they've even looked at you. When he finally turned, his face was not angry. It was something worse. It was calm, controlled, the face of a man who had already made a decision and simply needed to announce it. He told me plainly, without cruelty, but without warmth either, that he had seen the way things were developing, that he had noticed what I thought I had hidden so carefully, and that he respected my work too much to pretend otherwise. Then he said the words that rearranged everything inside me. He said that whatever I thought I was feeling, I needed to let it go. He said Serena's future was already written: partnerships, connections, alliances built on decades of trust between families. He said I was a brilliant young man with a future worth protecting, and that the kindest thing he could do for both of us was to tell me clearly, directly, and finally find someone else to love. I stood there in that office and felt the floor tilt beneath me. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that what I felt was real, that it wasn't ambition dressed up as affection, that I had never once looked at Serena and thought about what she could give me. But the words locked in my throat, because he was my CEO, and because some truths feel too fragile to speak aloud in front of someone who might crush them. I nodded. I thanked him. I walked out. Serena was in the hallway. She had not been eavesdropping, I know that now, because Serena was never the kind of person who listened at doors. She had simply been passing, holding a folder, on her way to a meeting. And our eyes met in that corridor the way they always did, suddenly, completely, like neither of us had ever learned how to look away from the other. And in that single moment, everything her father had just said to me dissolved into the air between us, because she looked at me the way a person looks at someone they have been waiting for without knowing they were waiting. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. But I looked at her. I looked at her in a way I had never allowed myself to before. Without the careful walls I always kept up, without the professional distance I used like armor. I looked at her the way a man looks at someone who has become the answer to a question he didn't know he was asking. And she looked back at me with something in her eyes that told me she understood every single word that had just passed between her father and me, and that she was not afraid. In the weeks that followed, I tried to do what Marcus had asked. I buried myself in work. I took on new projects, traveled for the company, filled every silence with something productive. I told myself I was being rational, mature, respectful. I told myself that some doors are closed for good reasons, and that a wise man learns to walk past them without looking back. But every time I returned to that building, every time I walked past her office or sat across from her in a meeting, the feeling returned, not diminished, not quieter, but somehow larger, as if distance had only given it more room to grow. Serena, for her part, did something that I did not expect. She began to create space for us to exist in the same world more honestly. Not dramatically, not recklessly, but with the quiet precision that defined everything she did. She started stopping by my office with questions she didn't really need answered, staying a little longer than the conversation required. She began leaving notes, small ones, slipped under my door or tucked into reports, not love letters, nothing that could be misread, just words, sentences that told me she saw me, that she knew what had been said, that she was not the kind of woman who let other people author her story. One evening, long after the office had emptied, and the city lights below had blurred the distinction between sky and earth, she came to find me. She sat across from me in the quiet of my office, and she told me something I have never forgotten. She told me that her father was a great man who had spent so long building walls to Sunpai, building walls to protect the people he loved, that he had forgotten the difference between protection and control. She told me that she had spent years allowing those walls to shape her choices, her relationships, her silence. And she told me that standing in that hallway, watching me walk out of her father's office with that particular kind of dignified heartbreak on my face, something had shifted in her, something she had been waiting a long time to feel permission to shift. We did not run away. We did not rebel with fire and noise. What happened between us happened slowly, honestly, and with a kind of courage that didn't announce itself. I went to Marcus again, not as an employee standing before a CEO, but as a man standing before a father. I told him the truth without strategy or performance. I told him that I had tried to do what he asked, that I had respected him enough to try, but that I could not manufacture distance from something that felt as real and rooted as anything I had ever known. I told him I wasn't asking for permission to love his daughter. I was asking for the chance to show him, over time, that his daughter deserved someone who would look at her, truly look at her, even after being told not to. Marcus Voss was quiet for a long time after that. The city hummed below us. The silence between us was different from the first time, less like a wall and more like a door, slightly ajar. He didn't give me his blessing that day, but he didn't close the door either. And sometimes that is where love begins, not in the grand, cinematic declarations, but in the small, terrifying act of refusing to pretend that what you feel is something less than what it is. Serena and I built something real. It took time, it took honesty, and it took the kind of patience that only grows in people who understand that the most valuable things in life resist the shortcut. Marcus came around, not all at once, but gradually, the way light enters a room when someone finally opens a curtain they've kept drawn for too long. He watched me, tested me, and slowly, quietly, began to trust what he saw. The day he finally shook my hand and called me something other than my last name, Serena was standing beside us, and she looked at me with those same eyes from that hallway, steady, knowing, unafraid. I had been told to find someone else to love. Instead, I looked at her. And in looking at her, I finally understood that love is not something you find in the place you're directed toward. It is something that finds you in the moment you stop looking away. If this story reached something real inside you, if it reminded you of a moment when you chose truth over comfort, or stayed when someone told you to leave, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Your support means more than you know. And before we close, drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever loved someone you weren't supposed to? Let's talk about it.